Music. No matter your Christian tradition, it's part of the worship experience. But is it a safe part? Do the words we sing match the theology being preached? Is tradition more valued than affirmation? Join me, Siobhan Boyd Nelson, and my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, for How Sweet the Sound, where we take a closer look at the hymns, worship anthems, and gospel favorites we sing and how they create or dismantle safer spaces for LGBTQIA people of faith. Ben, it's you again.
Yes, it is, and it's you, Siobhan. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Um, as we were chatting about beforehand, um, some of our listeners may hear a certain puppy in the background who is not liking a new piece of art that I put up and is growling because it's apparently a picture of a human, and he seems to think the human is with us.
Poor Scout. There's some new person staring at him, and he's not happy about
No, he's not. May have to change up the pictures, I guess.
it. Well, other than getting a lot of criticism on your home decorating, anything else going on with you, Ben?
Nah, just plugging away. Excited for another episode in this mini series of ours, or mini season of ours. Um, and interesting to dive into a hymn that is one of the more concerning, in my opinion, that you find in hymnals.
Yeah, you do still find this one in hymnals, though we'll get into it. There has been some official pushback from a couple of denominations. And today on our mini series, How Sweet the Sound, we are looking at Onward Christian Soldiers. And that's onward, comma, Christian Soldiers. It was composed in 1865. The lyrics were written in 1865, and the music was composed in 1871. And Ben, are you ready to dig in? Because, like you said, it's problematic at the onset, right? Tell us why you think it's
Yes, it is.
problematic at the onset.
Yes, it's problematic on the onset. It's problematic in the name of the song, but yes, I'm ready.
Okay, all right, let's dig into it. So let's start and talk about the story of the lyricist. And the person who wrote the lyrics is a guy by the name of Sabine Baring-Gould. He was born in 1834 and died in 1924. He lived in Devon, England. He had many occupations. He was an Anglican priest, a hagiographer, which is a biographer of saints and ecclesiastical leaders. He was an antiquarian, a novelist, a folk song collector, and an eclectic scholar. And when we get into some of the titles of his written works, you'll see what they mean by eclectic. He was also the lord of like a parish or something. He inherited a manor. So he was a person of means. He was the eldest son of a lord, inherited a manor. So he had plenty of means and therefore plenty of time to do really the voluminous writing that he did. He earned a Bachelor's of Arts from Cambridge University in 1857, and then that was upgraded to a Master's of Arts in 1860. So back then, it wasn't a separate degree, they just upgraded your bachelor's to a master's. And then he took holy orders in 1864 at the age of 30 and became the curate at Horbury Bridge in Yorkshire. So this has the beginning similar to Amazing Grace, because what we have here is a local curate. And what he is doing, what we're going to find is that he's writing a song specifically for his congregation, actually the children in his congregation, for a specific instance, right? So this was never meant to be a hymn that was sung by adults around the world the way that it is today. It was for very specific people in a very specific time. But first, let's detour into a fun fact. And that is that Sabine fell in love with a young woman. And when I say young, I mean very young woman named Grace. She was a daughter of a mill hand. And so the vicar, who was Sabine's boss, essentially, sent the girl to live with relatives for 2 years to learn middle class manners so that she would be of a, good enough standing to marry someone like Sabine. Now, at the same time, Sabine was a friend of George Bernard Shaw, the very famous playwright. And some believe that this story of Grace being sent off to learn all these manners and become, a proper middle class woman, partially inspired his play Pygmalion. Or, as many of us love, if we're into musicals, My Fair Lady, the musical. One of my favorite musicals, huge Audrey Hepburn fan. So, of course, I loved learning this very fun fact. But Sabine did, in fact, marry Grace in 1868, and they had 15 children, Ben, 14 of which lived into adulthood. So, not only is she having 15 children, she's actually raising 14 of them, that's a lot, Ben.
That's I can't imagine having that many children.
No, I cannot. But at least we do have this. When Grace passed away after 48 years of marriage, and when she passed, Sabine had "Half My Soul" put in Latin on her tombstone. And so that sounds particularly heartfelt. And, perhaps they really did have this runaway romance that we would all hope, especially when you're trying to raise 14 children together. You're going to need a lot of love and romance, I think. So, like I said, Baring-Gould, Sabine was a curate, was, a priest. And but that's not what he thought his biggest accomplishment was. And Ben, I think you've talked about this before, that priests often do other things. They teach or they write and do other things. Well, Sabine did a lot of other things, and he considered his collection of folk songs to be his greatest work. And so what he did is he went around the West Country, literally walking around the West Country, collecting folk songs, and he put it in this big 4-part volume. And then he also wrote so many novels, short stories, and books about folklore. Some of my favorite titles from, I think hundreds of titles that he wrote. We have The Book of Werewolves, also written in 1865. And it's one of the most frequently cited studies of lycanthropy. Then we have The Curious Myths of the Middle Ages. And each of the book's 24 chapters deals with a particular medieval superstition, and H.P. Lovecraft was a fan of that one. And then a few of the other ones that I just want to bring up, for example, a book of fairy tales retold by S. Baring-Gould, a book of ghosts, a book of the Riviera, and then lots of books like The Pocket Preacher. He wrote a lot of collections of sermons, or here's a collection of sermons on Lent, or here's meditations on Christ's suffering on the cross for the Lenten season. He even did outlines for those preachers who were extemporaneous preachers. He's like, here's an outline for you to preach from. But then he also wrote fun things like Amazing Adventures, and that had illustrations. So, the guy he was broad. He was into a lot of different things. But let's get to the song itself. It was written in 1865 as a processional hymn for children at that Horbury Bridge parish that he was the curate of. And the children had been invited to march to another parish to take place in a Pentecost season festival. And so Sabine thought that the children, as they're marching, should have a song to sing, and he couldn't find one that he thought was appropriate. And so he wrote, perhaps in the middle of the night, perhaps in as few as 15 minutes, a song that he titled Hymn for Procession with Cross and Banners. And that's because the children were literally going to be marching behind a cross and banners. And then he even said about the song, it was written in great haste, and I am afraid that some of the lines are faulty. So again, looking back to our Amazing Grace episode, the writer going, okay, maybe not my best work, or I'm sorry, our Awesome God episode. And so he was actually okay with lyrical changes even during his lifetime. Not a problem with him, which I think we're going to get into later on, Ben. If you want to, we'll know that we have Sabine's blessing later on in the episode. So, what about the song itself? So, as much as this was kind of a footnote in the life of Sabine Baring-Gould, the song itself has taken on its own life. For example, it is heavily associated with the Salvation Army, which is a denomination that was started also in England, where this song was written. This denomination also began in 1865, the year that the song was written, and the denomination refers to its members as soldiers, officers, and adherents, right? So the similarities, or the I guess the meeting of these two minds is quite obvious here. And the song has nothing to do with the Salvation Army, and the Salvation Army had nothing to do with the writing of the song. It just has, they're both heavily associated with military symbology, and therefore it was just kind of like a natural coming together. And so the Salvation Army band does often play this song, and it is included in their hymn book, but it's also included in like everybody else's hymn book, if we're being honest. But let's get into some other associations, because the Salvation Army isn't the only one. I know we could go down that rabbit hole. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but there are some other things. I think we could get into the lyrics plenty. But there are some political associations as well that we should be aware of. In 1912, it was adopted by the Progressive National Convention as their anthem. And so that year, the Progressive National Convention, they elected Theodore Roosevelt as their candidate for the Progressive Party. And he said that the Progressive Party was, quote, going to battle for the Lord. Then, the Progressive Party said that, Ben.
Well, I mean, we are talking about 1912, so, the Progressive Party may be a little bit different than what we would think of progressives these days. Not to mention, I mean, we're talking about 9 to 10 years before women have the right to vote nationally. World War I has not yet happened. I mean, there's a lot that's, has not happened yet to make us perhaps use the term progressive in a different way than we would in 2026.
Yeah, the progress had to come from somewhere, right, Ben? So they were where they were at the time. And then later in, I guess, the next generation, we're going to see Winston Churchill choosing this song in 1941 when he met with Franklin Roosevelt on a battleship. And he says of this choice, "We sang Onward Christian Soldiers, indeed, and I felt that this was no vain presumption, but that we had the right to feel that we were serving a cause for the sake of which a trumpet has sounded from on high. When I looked upon the densely packed congregation of fighting men of the same language, of the same faith, of the same fundamental laws, of the same ideals, it swept across me that here was the only hope, but also the sure hope of saving the world from measureless degradation."
Talk about Christian nationalism.
It is right there with Christian nationalism. It really is leaning into the idea that what the military of a nation is doing is somehow being referenced in scripture, or by this hymn, or by metaphors that were used in scripture, and therefore has the blessing of God.
I also find it interesting that Churchill says, when I looked upon that densely packed congregation of fighting men of the same language, of the same faith, broad assumption that everyone on that battleship were all Christian.
Yes. And Protestant Christian, probably, even if we're getting very specific. Yeah. So there has been pushback against this song. Obviously, it is incredibly militaristic in its language. And so in the 1980s, there were attempts to remove it from both the United Methodist hymnal and the Episcopal hymnal. but neither was successful. There was huge blowback from congregants who, it's a classic and no one wanted it removed. Well, a lot of people didn't want it removed, but it was left out of the 1990 and 2013 Presbyterian hymnals and perhaps the ELCA's 2006 hymnal. I wasn't able to confirm that one. And some Anglican hymn books have replaced it with Onward Christian Pilgrims, replacing that word soldiers. And I believe they've changed other of the language as well to kind of reduce that metaphor. And then, of course, it's all over films and TV. We know that it's all over the zeitgeist. So many different places have used it. Everyone knows it. Though, Ben, I will say, I don't know the words to this song. Like, when I hear the tune, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've heard that before. It's vaguely familiar, but not having grown up in a church that used, I would guess, a Protestant hymnal, it just wasn't one that was played often or sung often to my recollection.
Well, I think this one fits into that category. I laugh a little. Uh, of what you have sometimes, I think this is the word you've used, of the boring way that particularly historically white denominations worship. I mean, Onward Christian Soldiers is not much of a banger. It's not lively. It's
Mm-mm.
not necessarily, I mean, it's not like a minor key O Come Emmanuel-esque type of hymn, but it's not, it's very much in the same vein as like Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, or Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. These very British English hymns that upbeat is the wrong word, maybe are very glorious, have big swells of an organ. But they're
Yeah.
not, these aren't songs that you're going to be dancing in the pews or in the aisles to. These are not hymns that they're supposed to invoke, patriotism and Christianity. They're not supposed to, talk about the spirit moving in a way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And when I say boring, it is because they don't seem to be making a joyful noise. The noise, there's definitely a sound being made. It is very reverent, but it just doesn't seem joyful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, growing up Catholic, we also didn't use Onward Christian Soldiers.
Okay.
I remember hearing it for the first time in a movie, I think.
Oh, wow.
And then my mom, who grew up American Baptist, saying, "Oh yeah, we sang that growing up."
Yeah.
But no, this was not the Catholic hymnal that I grew up with. Had removed as many references to war, battle, etc., as possible, even to the effect of the song "Battle Hymn of the Republic" was changed to "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the Lord" or something. Um,
Right.
you know, calling something the battle hymn of anything was simply not used in that hymnal.
Got it.
So this was definitely not there.
Okay. Okay. So when you get to the lyrics of the actual lyrics of the song, and even the title, often we are referencing, or we are referred to, Second Timothy chapter 2 verse 3, which in the King James version reads, "Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ." And that's, of course, not the only, um, I would say, army or battle related metaphor that Paul uses in the epistles. But it is the one that references being a soldier of Jesus Christ, or a Christian soldier, in that metaphor. Now, that's a metaphor on its face, I guess. And there's been a lot of, I think, discussion, and Ben, you can obviously speak more to this, discussion in theological circles about, what what is there to this metaphor? How much should we be taking this metaphor to heart, of using putting on the armor of God, being in spiritual warfare, the Bible being a sword? I forget what's the helmet of salvation. There it is. And, all those different battle references and metaphors that are used in the epistles, and how much they were intended to actually invoke a battle or soldier type of mindset in Christians, which we do see in the Salvation Army denomination. The Salvation Army denomination absolutely took those metaphors to heart and very literally, and that is why their members are called soldiers. The head of their denomination is the general. So that is a very literal translation of that text. And there are those who believe that perhaps we shouldn't be translating that text so literally. What say you, Ben?
Well, not just the epistles, but the whole Bible draws on military imagery because military imagery was simply a part of the world in which these people lived.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people in the US, for example, particularly in our generation and the recent generations, unless you're associated with the military or you grew up in a town that was near a military base, seeing soldiers out and about is just not something that we are typically, or is, just typically part of who we are and our culture. Seeing people in armor, seeing people with helmets on, seeing people with swords or spears or whatever else was simply a part of how most of our biblical ancestors lived their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Times were very different. The carrying of weapons for a purely defensive purpose was just part of how you lived, for better or for worse.
Right.
And I mean, there are definitely people today. I would imagine you and I both, Siobhan, if we saw someone carrying a gun openly, would not have a necessarily positive reaction unless that
Not at all.
person, and maybe not even in this case, but definitely if that person wasn't immediately identifiable as a police officer.
Yeah.
And again, maybe not even then, but
Yeah.
you know, there are other people. I think about some of my family members who own guns, keep guns in the home, who have a very different association with seeing someone carrying a gun openly than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the Bible is using this kind of warlike army weapon armor metaphors because it's what the people at that time would have understood. It made sense. How much that means that the Bible is therefore supporting war or not supporting war gets tricky, particularly in the Old Testament, because God is directly associated with the success or failure of the Hebrew armies and the
Right.
armies that are fighting against them. Um, but I think we have to be very careful about applying any of these metaphors, any of these allegories to our current day and our life today. Um, just like we need to be very careful about treading on lions and adders, um, or for forget where it is. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Well,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not exactly what's being said here. We are not
Right.
Christianity and the New Testament and Jesus even are not saying if your right hand causes you to sin, physically cut it off. It is a metaphor. It is an allegory. It is not direct instructional, um, an instructional text. And I think that is the same thing that implies in this case.
Yeah.
So yes, it's nice imagery. It works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. But it perhaps should not be directly applied to how we live our lives, particularly as Christians.
Yeah. And I would also bring up that, I think we have to be careful about using the meta or, calling ourselves Christian soldiers when I don't know that Christ would have called his followers soldiers. He referred to his followers as fishers. fishers of men. And it's not, I think that's, I wouldn't say it's the opposite of being a soldier, but it definitely isn't something that's going to carry a weapon or a helmet or instill fear in others in ways that a soldier would. And the idea that, you know, the Paul in the first century Christians were living, you know, with Roman soldiers. You were talking about, you know, all of antiquity was really living in a much more militarized environment than we live in today. And I think that we have to dig a little bit deeper in order to understand how we can take this militarized language and apply it to a non-militarized environment or an environment that we want to be non-militarized. And that means you can't just read the words. It
Yep.
takes a little bit more to do that work.
Yep. Yep.
And then before we get into the lyrics, I do just want to, and I have shared with us the 1871 lyrics. It includes 5 verses. Often only 4 verses are printed, and it just kind of depends which one is left out. I saw 2, 3, 4, and 5 all left out of different versions of them. And when I compared an 1871 version and a 2021 version, they were almost identical for those who were still printing the song. And then I just want to draw us back to the fact that this song was written for children. So in 1865 in the countryside of England, right? So we, I think, as 21st century Americans, adults, I think we have to recognize that this song wasn't really designed for us. It was designed for little children to sing as they went actually marching to another place to take part in a Pentecost festival. And there is, I think, you know, there's victory kind of in that Pentecost season, and there are reasons why you would, you know, talk about victory and things like that, and have banners and be marching behind a cross that I think are relevant to that time and place, and perhaps move the song away from such direct militaristic um, references.
Yep. Yep.
All right, so you ready to dig in there?
Sure. I think given that we have 5 verses, I'm going to read the refrain first and then just go verse to verse.
Perfect.
So the refrain is Onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. And now I'm just going to start the first verse. Onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ, the royal master, leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banners go. At the sign of triumph, Satan's host doth flee. On then, Christian soldiers, on to victory. Hell's foundations quiver at the shout of praise. Brothers, lift your voices, loud your anthems raise. Like a mighty army moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. We are not divided, all one body we, one in hope and doctrine, one in charity. Crowns and thrones may perish, kingdoms rise and wane, but the church of Jesus constant will remain. Gates of hell can never 'gainst the church prevail. We have Christ's own promise, and that cannot fail. Onward then, ye people, join our happy throng. Blend with ours your voices in the triumph song. Glory, laud, and honor on to Christ the King. This through countless ages, men and angels sing.
There we have another poem. Very, I think it has that old world language to it. I think that really kind of cements it as an older hymn. Even if we sing it in the modern day, it's always going to sound like it came from a different age, a bygone age.
I think that's true, particularly if we make sure to read the lyrics. But I think this is another one, much like we saw with Amazing Grace, where we might lose some of the poetics and some of the uh, you know 19th century. This would have been Victorian England,
Mm-hmm.
um, or not prose, verse, um, when we sing it. But no, I think it I mean, even just the language is very Victorian. It's very King James version. It's definitely not Hillsong United.
No, not Hillsong United, definitely. Um, so let's start in that first verse or in the refrain. Let's just jump right into the refrain. Onward Christian soldiers. And marching as to war. It's very direct here that you're not just marching because you're signing up for military parade, or just pulling out the colors and having a nice time. You are marching as if you're going to war.
Yes. Um, and I mean, I just have so many concerns about this. Um, what makes one a Christian soldier? What is, I mean, hell, what is a Christian soldier in general? If you're, if the God you're worshiping has been called the Prince of Peace,
Mm-hmm.
then what? Excuse my language. What the fuck is a Christian soldier?
It is, yes, it is a question of, but I think that the idea is that each person who is a Christian is in fact a soldier. You are a soldier by the fact that you are a Christian, because as a Christian, you are at war with evil, Satan, and I think that's referenced later in the lyrics there.
It is.
And then we have with the cross of Jesus going on before, which I think is just a very literal reference to the way in which they were marching for the procession that this was written for. But it
Yeah,
is,
and I mean, go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it's also vaguely biblical. Um, the idea of taking up one's cross and following Jesus, not to mention the carrying of the Ark of the Covenant before the armies of the Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, there's a lot of imagery in there. There's a lot of imagery just in Christian history. For the example of Constantine putting crosses on his soldiers' shields at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and all of a sudden, oh, we won because we more or less became Christians. Um, I still have some problems with this idea of us being led by the cross to go to war.
Right, right. Even if it is spiritual warfare, right?
Sure.
Um, and then Christ, the royal master. Now, yeah, tell me if I'm wrong, Ben, but that's not a way that I have heard Christ described before. I mean, I have. I know that but the royal master seems like a very particular phrase. I've heard master used to reference Christ. I've of course heard royalty used to reference Christ, but that phrase royal master seems singular.
Um, I mean, I think it is. I'm not sure if I've seen it elsewhere. Um, I see the concerns. At the same time, I also wonder if Royal Master just simply met the rhyming and rhythm that
Yes.
that the lyricist needed, rather than king or prince
Mm,
or something else.
yep.
Um, but yes, I don't I can't think of anywhere else that I've seen Royal Master. But to be frank, I'm not really sure how many places I've seen Royal Master used to reference earthly monarchs or
Okay.
I don't feel like that's a way that people would typically refer to, say, Queen Victoria at this time in England.
Right, right.
But I could be wrong.
So leads against the foe, and while it's not spelled out in this verse, the foe I think we can assume is the devil or Satan or some type of evil. Um, Forward into battle, see his banners go. So again, forward into battle, there's that very literal reference to being in battle, being going to war, and then again the reference to the banners that were actually part of that procession. But then banners are very big, also in the church, right? That and part of a lot of worship or sacrament.
Sure, and for an Anglican parish, Anglicans, for whatever reason, like their banners. I mean, at Swanee, we used to carry um, every Sunday when the choir processed in and out of the chapel. The one of the choristers would carry a large banner that said University Choir on it. Like, it was hard to identify who the choir might be. I mean, we were only singing vested and carrying hymnals. Um, but yeah, I mean, Anglicans and others, not just Anglicans, but you know, carrying banners not just into battle, but also just into church would again be a very common image.
And fun for the kids. I can only imagine them having a great time.
Sure, I mean they're marching from their church to a celebration, so they might have a parish banner. Um, there might even be a little bit of good natured hometown rivalry going on. Like, hey, we're
Yeah.
meeting up with the other church, or we're meeting up with the next town over,
Hmm.
um, and we're gonna again lightheartedly say how our town's a little bit better than theirs.
Yeah. Really fun. All right. So from there, that's the end of verse one, goes into the refrain. And then we get to verse two, which starts out at the sign of triumph, Satan's host doth flee. So here we have the literal reference to Satan as the foe that we're battling against. And I guess when he sees that we're going to win, he and his folks, they run away.
Well, I almost feel like Baring-Gould needs to give a little credit to John Milton here.
Okay.
In Paradise Lost, when Satan's forces are battling against the forces of heaven, what finally ends up winning the battle is that Christ appears, and the radiance of Christ's face just kind of knocks all the demons into hell. Um, so I see a very, I mean, I may just be making the connection myself, but I just see a little veiled reference to John Milton and Paradise Lost here.
Yeah, definitely. Then he says, on then, Christian soldiers, on to victory, which just makes me think, all right, the bad guys fell down. You keep marching over top of them, take their position. But then we have hell's foundations quiver at the shout of praise. And yeah, what you got?
Well, no, I was just going to make a comment here that I'm not sure I've ever heard a shout of praise from Anglicans. I've heard shouts of praise from Pentecostals, from charismatic Christians,
Yeah.
but the thought of a shout of praise from Anglicans, I mean, come on now. Anglicans don't shout. Anglicans are quiet.
They are. They are. And I will say, as someone who was raised in the Pentecostal church, we were absolutely told to shout. Shout like you're pulling down the walls of Jericho, and hell will hear it. So, but here you have again that literal reference to hell, um, as a literal place, because it is a place that has a foundation that can quiver, right? So that is meaning it is a reference to a literal place. And so both the reference to Satan and the reference to hell are going to be problematic for a lot of folks, right, Ben?
Yep. And I mean, there are some of us, perhaps less so in 1871, but there are those of us who see Satan, the devil, hell, all of these things as great imagery about evil, but really don't believe in a physical hell or an actual Satan. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Satan makes for good TV, and if you're one of those people, ways to scare the little kids. But you know, I personally do not believe in a literal Satan, a literal hell. Um, I'm not saying that's the correct view. I have many good friends who are very educated, rational human beings who totally believe in hell and a physical Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but personally, that's not something I really believe in.
Right.
So hell's foundations quiver. Okay, I mean, again, it's good imagery.
Yes.
Much like putting on the helmet of salvation is great imagery. Maybe not exactly what is going on though.
Right.
I do like the idea though that at a shout of praise, that evil might retreat.
Yes.
That there would be some sort of almost acknowledgement of what's going on, whether or not there is an actual hell or an actual Satan.
Yeah, to the extent that there is imagery of a group of people coming together, making a joyful noise, putting up this righteous praise, this shout of praise, and that collective energy, that collective movement and force and working together causes the foundation of something to move. I mean, that is powerful imagery, whether or not you're relating it to an actual hell.
Yep.
Then we have brothers, lift your voices, loud your anthems raise. Um, Again, the idea that we're lifting our voices loudly is, but again, this was written for kids. I can believe that the kids absolutely were lifting their voices very loudly and singing with their full hearts as they were marching.
And to be fair, Anglicans, Episcopalians can raise their voices in song.
Mm-hmm.
I just, again, a shout of my ideas of a shout of praise and Anglicans raising their voices in song are two very different realities. Um, yeah, I mean, I have no problem with these two lines, except, again, in 2026, I'd want something a little bit more gender inclusive than brothers.
Yeah, yeah.
And we will. There's a few other times that brothers or men are used in here. Then again, in 1871, okay, fine. You, most people would have been okay with men as a reference to all humans. I would like to see something better than brothers here. Um, whether that's humans,
Mm-hmm.
people, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
something. I mean, I think there are other words you can use here other than brothers.
I think there's even one version that's been written, onward, comrades, onward. So you could use comrades there instead of brothers, perhaps, or something. There's, like you said, there's a lot of different language that we could pull in there. Yeah.
Comrades, I mean, not to go down that rabbit hole, but comrades starts changing the meaning of this quite a bit.
Yeah, it does.
Um,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, we're going from British Christians and American Christians and Christian nationalism to starting to introduce Marx into this song. So I'd be all for that.
Yeah. Well, that was another rabbit hole that we could have. Trust me, there were multiple rabbit holes that were involved in the making of this episode. That was another one. Again, I tried to avoid it because I just knew there was so much right here in these lyrics. So, jumping into verse 3, like a mighty army moves the church of God. And I'm interpreting this as it's saying in a poetic, Victorian way, the church of God moves like a mighty army,
Yes.
which
Yes.
I mean, the Salvation Army, yes, that particular denomination, in fact, does function as an army, and they have different distinctions for different levels, for all of their different soldiers and adherents. But generally, the church as an army, do you think that's an appropriate analogy for the church?
No, and I think it gives into a misunderstanding of uh, what are the three? It's the church militant, the church triumphant, and the church something else.
Okay.
Big Victorian theme. But people would refer to the church militant.
Mm-hmm.
And what that actually meant, even though it uses the word militant or military, it didn't refer to the church as an army. Militant just simply meant the church on earth. So the
Okay.
church militant was the church on earth. The church triumphant was the church in heaven.
Oh, okay.
And I cannot remember what the third. There's a third church something. Um,
Penitent.
I can't remember. Perhaps
Okay. That's what I'm finding
is
here.
that, or did you just look it up?
Yes, I just looked it up. Penitent.
There we go.
All right.
But I think this association with the church and an army reminds me too much of that church militant idea. And again, that wasn't a military, even though the words are very similar, it wasn't a military reference. It was just the church that is still acting in the world.
Right. But it's because it's the church that's acting in the world, it is the church that is essentially at war with the world, right? That's or battling against the evil in the world.
I mean, I think that's definitely one reading of it and one
Okay.
potential reading of it.
Okay.
But I don't think the church. I would like to think that the church working in the world is not just the church against the world,
Well,
but the church working with the world. But that's also my very 21st century reading.
but I think that's a good point, though, because in 1865, actually going back to the Salvation Army and the tenets of its founding, and one of the tenets of the founding was that they were going to work with the folks who were quote unquote in the world, unlike the good Christians, the good Anglican Christians who wouldn't in any way be associated with the drunkards, with the sex workers, right? With other
Sure.
marginalized groups, the poor writ large and the marginalized. So I think that's a good point. That in 1865, actually, there were a lot of people who were working in the church who saw it as their work to work against the world, meaning working against drunkards, working against sex workers, rather than working with them or trying to bring them into the church.
Yep.
Then next we have again another reference to brothers. We are treading where the saints have trod. Uh, Again, we could use some better language there, but I think they're referring to congregants or fellow Christians, right? Fellow Christians,
Sure.
we are treading where the saints have trod. This is to me trying to be an encouraging and empowering line, meaning this is hard, but the saints have done this. Therefore, you're walking in the footsteps of the saints. You can do this.
Yes, and my guess is that when they say saints here, in the very Anglican sense and in a more Protestant sense, they're referring to simply anyone who has lived their life on earth and gone to heaven.
Yes.
It's almost a reference. It's probably the closest reference we're going to have among particularly white Europeans to something about referencing ancestors.
That was my thought as well.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, this is how they would have said that, and that's how still some, United Methodists, Episcopalians, Anglicans, Presbyterians typically talk about the saints not as like a Catholic or Orthodox saints, but more just simply people who have lived their life in a good way and have ostensibly gone to heaven.
Got it. We are not divided, all one body we, one in hope and doctrine, one in charity. So again, this is a very, all of us together. Um, and if we all are together and not divided, then our power is, going to be enough. And we're one in hope, in doctrine, and in charity. And I think charity here, we're referring to love.
Yep.
Yeah, King James Version, charity. There we go. Now, when you say one in
Yes.
hope and doctrine, what do you think he's referring to?
Well, he is writing this for his congregation. So the idea being that if we're going to the same church, if we're in the same community, then we all hold to relatively the same doctrine.
Right.
I think that doctrine piece becomes a little problematic when taken outside of a particular congregation. And I'm not a huge fan of the pairing of hope and doctrine in the same line,
Yeah.
but I think it's referring to we all have this hope of the resurrection. We're all of the same doctrine, i.e., we're all part of this denomination, this church, and we are all united in love, but also perhaps in how we approach the world and we approach each other by being charitable, perhaps not in the sense of like giving to charity, but charitable in the sense of we help each other out.
Right. So the fourth verse, crowns and thrones may perish, kingdoms rise and wane, but the church of Jesus constant will remain. Now, this sounds very, very familiar. Does this sound familiar to you as well?
Definitely. I mean, it's straight out of the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Straight out of a lot of love songs as well, I feel. There's a lot of different verses that have been written. No matter what comes and goes, my love is going to be forever, or God's love will be forever. Here it's saying that the Church of Jesus will remain constant through kingdoms coming and going, crowns and thrones coming and going.
And I think it actually, this verse to me is interesting, for the people or for the person who actually wrote it or the context in which he wrote it,
Mm-hmm.
but in other contexts, because it's been written in 1865. The lyrics we're looking at are 1871. When this makes its way across the pond to the U.S., I mean, the U.S. has just fought the U.S. Civil War.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was very troubling about the Civil War is that otherwise united denominations broke up North v South.
Yeah.
Not always on political grounds so much. Not necessarily on like, well, we're in the North and we oppose slavery, and we're in the South and we're pro-slavery, but they broke up over the fact of, well, you're now in the North, you're in the U.S., and we're in the South in the Confederate States, so we need to have two different branches.
Mm-hmm.
And by 1871, a lot of those denominations hadn't fully come back together. Now, some of them never would.
Right.
What we refer to as the Southern Baptist Convention now is the group that broke off at the beginning or just before the Civil War, and what we now call the American Baptist denomination is what used to be the Northern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
And they were the ones who remained loyal to the U.S. or to the Union. The Episcopal Church broke down over North-South as well. They came back together, I think, in the late 1870s, 1880s. But a lot of Protestant or a lot of non-Catholic denominations split over that North-South, different, quote unquote, different countries piece of the U.S. Civil War. So this idea that the Church of Jesus constant will remain would be something that for people in the U.S. would be definitely on their hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, whether or not we were right to break apart, it still wasn't a good thing, and we probably shouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Catholic Church in the U.S. mostly remained intact, but that's a little bit different because of how the Catholic Church is set up. But almost every other institution, particularly religious institution, broke down between North and South. So this would be something that I think, in the larger sense of Christian unity, but in this one particular situation, would be very salient for people coming out of the U.S. Civil War and looking at all the things that on the surface the Civil War did and Reconstruction after it, but also the things much deeper that also went on.
Right. Very good point. And he goes deeper. Gates of hell. I have the worst accent sometimes, and I say that word as though it's spelled Hail, but it is Hell. Gates of hell can
And
never.
I love the fact that is it's basically a Southern accent, and I recognize that you're married to someone from the South, but it is not an Ohio accent, and I love it when it comes out
It's
in
Appalachian.
your speech.
I claim it as Appalachian. Uh,
Yeah, okay,
okay.
I'll give you that.
Okay. Gates of hell can never against the church prevail. We have Christ's own promise, and that cannot fail. I think
Yeah,
that cannot fail echoes back to oceans, um, and Christ not failing today, has never failed, and won't start now. So that's
sure.
definitely something that we can relate to. I think that just the idea of the gates of hell is a very literal reference, and I believe biblical reference, to hell that may be really tough for some folks.
Yes, it is a direct biblical reference, and I was just trying to find the exact verse, but it's Jesus says to Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it."
Ah, yes, yes.
In the Gospels. So I mean, it is directly from the Gospels. It's
Hmm.
directly from Jesus, and I think that's what they mean when we say we have Christ's own promise. Is the promise in that verse?
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, the fifth verse. Onward then, ye people, join our happy throng, blend with ours your voices in the triumph song. Okay, here I really feel like we get back to this being a procession hymnal for kids. Because again, it's back to being joyous. Come on, folks, join in. Let's sing this really triumphant song together.
Yes. Um, and I love the blend with ours your voices in the triumph song.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from a musical standpoint, not a musical standpoint in the sense of the lyrics or the music for this song, but from the standpoint of blending your voices with other people and singing in unison. I mean, that has some just wonderful imagery.
It does. Then glory, laud, and honor unto Christ the King. This through countless ages, men and angels sing. And so we were closing really strong there, Ben, really, really strong. And then we had to reference men. not that a reference to men is wrong.
Yeah,
Well, Christ the King as well. Yes. Yeah. Which that one is, I don't even hear that one, I'll be honest, just because of how often I hear the phrase Christ the King. There's the church, there's the
sure.
school, all those different things. But yes, absolutely, Christ the King. I think both for a very male reference as well as a very like dominating, king type of reference there. And then this through countless ages, men and angels sing. And men there obviously referring to humankind as opposed to angels. And again, using men to reference everyone as we were wont to do at a certain time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we came so close to a good fifth verse.
Yeah, right. It would be nice if we could just have like a complete verse that we really, really enjoyed, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Well, before we get into our verdict, I want to offer a couple of verses from the song Onward Christian Pilgrims. And Onward Christian Pilgrims was actually written, I believe, in 1982. So this is during that time that I talked about earlier when there was that pushback, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be having this song that's so militaristic in nature. And so it was composed in 1982 by David Wright and set to the exact same tune as Onward Christian Soldiers. So it's very hard to find the words because I do believe that it's still under copyright. And I found an actual um, um, program from a church in a village in England where they printed out the words. So I can share these with you, Ben. And it goes, Onward Christian pilgrims, Christ will be our light. See the heavenly vision breaks upon our sight. Out of death's enslavement, Christ has set us free. On then to salvation, hope, and liberty. Thoughts on the first verse?
It's much better than the original.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's generally joyous
Yes, yes.
and really not talking about
Um,
war, except to the extent that enslavement can have a lot of association with war, particularly in ancient times, and be one of those byproducts of war or reasons for war. But here they're speaking
yep,
specifically of death's enslavement, which is a very biblical reference to how death is seen or referenced in the Bible, and then the ability to be set free from death through everlasting life and or salvation.
yes, yes.
Then the second one is Onward Christian Pilgrims Up the Rocky Way, where the dying Savior bids us watch and pray. Through the darkened valley, walk with those who mourn, share the pain and anger, share the promised dawn.
Again, I like it a hell of a lot better than the original.
Yeah, I don't know that I've
Um,
ever heard of a hymn telling you to walk with those who mourn and share the pain and anger. I mean, those are very good words.
yep, definitely, definitely. Um, and again, far more positive than what we have in the original version.
Right. This third, oh, go ahead.
What did they hold on before we go into the third verse?
Mhm.
What did they? What was the name of this, or how did they rename it?
Onward Christian Pilgrims.
See, I have a little bit of trouble with pilgrims.
Okay.
If we were in the UK, if we were in um, some other English speaking context, it might not be as much of a problem. But when we talk about pilgrims in the US, we have to acknowledge that there were a group of people that called themselves the Pilgrims who came here and almost immediately set up their own theocracy and oppressed the native people who had been here for countless generations. Not to mention then all the manifest destiny, Christian nationalism, Pilgrim Progress, etc., that has been done using this pilgrim term. So I still struggle a bit. I'm liking these lyrics a lot better, but um, there's still that use of the word pilgrim as if it's a positive thing. And yes, I realize that being a pilgrim, going on pilgrimage, is positive, but I think given the association of Onward Christian Soldier already with war,
Hmm.
I struggle a bit with now using pilgrim in the title.
I agree, though I don't have quite as negative association with the term pilgrim. For some reason, I really do just think of it as a traveler. And so I literally hear onward Christian traveler when I see that. And for some reason, don't have that. I don't think of the pilgrims or any of those negative connotations when I see it, but those are absolutely essentially, if we're going to update a song and get rid of negative imagery, why not choose a better word than pilgrim? I absolutely hear you on
Yeah.
that. So in the third verse, just wanted to note that there is a reference to the resurrection. Onward, Christian pilgrims, in the early dawn, death's great seal is broken, life and hope reborn. So very clearly a reference to Easter Sunday, the seal of the tomb being broken. That's death's seal, and the door of the tomb being rolled away, and then life and hope being reborn because of being resurrected. And then it goes on, faith in resurrection lightens pilgrims' hearts. Every load is lightened, every fear departs. Again, very positive and uplifting, talking about fear departing. Gotta love that. Again, kind of the opposite of war, being at war, because I imagine that's a absolutely fear fulfilled type of experience. And then finally, just the final verse is onward Christian pilgrims, hearts and voices raise till the whole creation offers perfect praise. Swords are turned to plowshares, pride and envy cease, truth embraces justice, hope resolves in peace. Now, I'm going to say this might be my favorite verse because I think it just so clearly goes in the face of the sword being the thing that we should have in our hand. And this going to the plowshare or being the fisher, the person that's actually, resourcing rather than ending life. You're actually the person who's sowing into life.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
But yeah, go ahead.
So I don't want this to be like you like the debate about alternate verses, but I also found alternate
Oh, okay.
verses
Yes.
to this written by Brian
Oh,
McClare.
yeah. Please share.
So this was posted on his website in
Okay.
2016 um, uh, as part of what's called the Convergence Music Project. It's a group of people who get together and try to either write new Christian hymns or better
Mm-hmm.
Christian hymns. But as part of that project, he rewrote the lyrics
Okay.
himself, and they're similar to what you read, but they're definitely different as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um, so, with a small fear of increasing our episode by another, half hour or something, I wanted to read some of these. So he doesn't have a refrain, but he starts onward, all disciples, in the path of peace, just as Jesus taught us, love your enemies. Walk on in the Spirit, seek God's kingdom first. Let God's peace and justice be your hunger and your thirst. Onward, all disciples, in humility. Walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly. Feel free to jump
Yeah,
in. I'm not
no,
going to read the rest of it.
that's great.
Um,
I love the love wholeheartedly, love boldly. I mean, come on here, people. Great minds thinking alike.
yep, yep,
Um, and just so much of what we want to hear from, I think, churches more in our everyday lives, Ben, right? These are the things it's telling us to walk with
totally,
justice,
totally.
to love our enemies, to seek peace. Those are all beautiful things.
Yep. Verse 2, we now face our failures in remorse and tears. We must hammer plowshares from our swords and spears. Turned from the broad highway of prejudice and war to follow Jesus to a place we've never been before. Onward, all disciples, in humility. Walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly.
Again, we are taking spears and swords, we are turning them into plowshares, so we're giving up that old version of us that was always in this sense of war or in battle. Absolutely love that.
Verse 3, feel a fresh wind stirring, justice flowing free, makes our deserts bloom in Eden like beauty. Seek the greatest treasure, let peace be your dream, justice like a river and an ever flowing stream. Onward, all disciples, in humility, walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly.
Again, beautiful imagery of justice like a stream.
Yep. Yeah, I love that one. I mean, it's both biblical. It also references one of Dr. King's most famous
Mm-hmm.
sermons. Verse 4, all regimes of violence, dominating power, they will boast of victory for their fragile hour. But the way of Jesus, weaponless and meek, will not be defeated, and so his way we seek. Onward, all disciples, in humility, walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Again, I love, but the way of Jesus, weaponless and meek.
Yes.
I don't exactly like the idea that we're making Jesus meek because I don't think Jesus was meek, but Jesus was definitely
Yes.
weaponless.
Yes. But though told us to be meek sometimes, right? Like, so.
Sure. Verse 5, onward arm in arm, then onward hand in hand. March with joyful song so all can understand. Nothing is impossible for our God above, through the power of service and the gentle might of love. Onward, all disciples, in humility, walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's continuing that idea of coming together and doing the work together, and that coming together being the power that breaks through and gets you through.
And I also love that the first two lines of that verse, onward arm in arm, then onward hand in hand, march with joyful song so all can
Mm-hmm.
understand. To me, that shifts this from either a militaristic march or even just this kind of like, marching from your congregation to some other place to more of almost like a
Okay.
protest. Joining arm in arm and singing as we go. Has much more of a joyous celebration or of a defiant protest
Yeah,
to
yeah,
it.
that's great.
In the last verse, boldly let us venture where Christ's feet have trod, sharing the adventure of the living God, saving, not condemning, not casting a stone, spreading a rich banquet for the outcast and alone. Onward, all disciples, in humility, walk with God, do justice, love wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it's really neat, I think, how this songwriter was able to maintain many of the themes of the song, of the unity of Christ's body, of the church working together and supporting one another. But was able to also say war and violence aren't necessary to this work. It's the work is still just as triumphant. God is still as powerful in these lyrics, and is we're just as much guaranteed a victory in these lyrics. But there wasn't the use of war or violence to get there. In fact, it was the literal denial of war and violence in order to reach that goal. So that's just really cool how they were able to do that.
Totally, totally. Okay, so we come to our verdict about the original, or at least the 1871 version of the
Yes.
original. What say you, Siobhan?
Oh, this one's a hard one, Ben. Because I'm so torn between what it was when it was written, and what it has become. Um, and I think that I'm at the point of remix. And I think the reason I'm at remix is because we just heard an amazing remix. And yes, it remixed most of it, but I think it's one of those that we don't actually have to get rid of the themes or the tune or any of those associations, because really there aren't any negative ones that I could find, or any negative associations, and maybe other than some theological differences, right? Like maybe today we would not have our youth groups singing about marching on to war as little soldiers, right? And that is, but that again is,
Well.
yeah,
Let's be frank. The youth groups of churches that you and I would attend, lead,
well, they would.
etc., would not be doing that. There are definitely churches out there that are not just using the themes of war to pep up their youth groups, but are going
Oh
significantly
yes,
further than
yes,
that.
absolutely. So yes, so I can't think that we can fault 1865 Sabine Baring-Gould as a vicar for writing this song for his youth group, essentially. And I don't think there's any ill will or anything nasty there that we need to be avoiding. So I think the remix is the way to go. This 2016 remix is absolutely beautiful. It maintains the themes of the song that were, I think, most positive and most important, especially if we think of this as a song of Pentecost, right? To be sung during the season of Pentecost. So yeah, let's keep it around. Let's just use those better verses.
Sure. I'm with you on that. Without these better rewrites, and let's be clear, the one you shared and the one from Brian McLaren are both
Mm-hmm.
good options. And I'm sure there are people who have others who have rewritten or written new verses. Um, yes, I would agree with you on remix because again, we have evidence of good remixes of this song. Um, that said, I would encourage. I would frankly encourage churches to rip this out of their hymnal and burn it, but that's just me. Um, I mean, use the remix, use the better verses. Don't toss out everything, but toss out the 1871 lyrics because look, Sabine Baring-Gould may have not intended his lyrics and his song to be used in this way, but they have been
Yeah.
used in this way. They've been connected directly to militarism. Um, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not alone. I mean, there are other songs out there. Battle Hymn of the
Mm-hmm.
Republic is one. Not to mention, I'm trying to think of what the song is. In some places, it's Eternal Father, Strong to Save. It has other names, but again, it's another one that's very militaristic. I actually think it's still the official hymn of the
Oh,
U.S. Navy, but it's which is we can talk about church and state there, but it's almost the naval version or the ocean version of Onward
wow.
Christian Soldiers, um, because it talks about
Okay,
waves and
fun.
ships.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are other songs like that, and I would say that though I think they all could be rewritten, I would highly encourage congregations not to use the Victorian or 19th century, early 20th century lyrics for those anyway.
Yeah, especially when such good lyrics are out there, right? And I feel like this is one of those where it's like, okay, you don't actually have to do the work. Ben, as the vicar of a small church, you don't actually have to sit down and write LGBTQ or marginalized people's affirming lyrics for these hymns. This work has been done in many ways. It's just doing the work of finding it, because I can see if this is a hymn that is beloved, if it's an older church, if there's a lot of tradition surrounding this hymn, if your congregation is one that enjoys more reverent music, but you want reverent music that is also empowering. I think this could be reverent music that is also empowering, and I think that hits a need that definitely serves a need in our congregations. Awesome! Look, we solved it, Ben. Solved. Well, that brings us to the end of a very exciting episode. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. If there is a song that you would like for us to break down, please let us know in the comments or leave us a message on Instagram or send us an email. Ben loves getting your emails. Remember to like, subscribe, tell your friends, and of course, we'll see you next time on How Sweet the Sound.
Thank you for joining us on How Sweet a Sound, produced by Love Boldly and the Coming Out Christian podcast. If you enjoyed this content, consider donating to Love Boldly today. You can donate at www.loveboldly.org/donate. That's www.loveboldly.org/donate. Also, like and follow us on Instagram and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.